Hi there, BookTube. It's Ros of Scally Dandling About the Books, and this is
Tilly from Tilly's Shelf, and we're back to do another joint discussion of a book.
but not this time new fiction, because it's People April. And so we've taken the chance to read a non-fiction book about a person.
Which is the main criteria for People April.
Yes, as a People April book, and so this is a bonus Ros and Tilly discussion for People April about a memoir. Do you want to say what we chose to read?
Yes, so just you may know, if you were participating in People April, there was a vote on 4 different top books to be the group read, and the book that came second and didn't quite make it was Strong Female Character by Fern Brady. Well, we both were really keen to read this anyway, so we thought, why not just cover very well. So this is quite a recent memoir. I think she was writing it in 2022. It might have been published in 2023, and it's a memoir. Fern Brady is a comedian. You may know her from various comedy gigs. She was also recently on Taskmaster, and this is a memoir of her life in light of her newfound knowledge of having been recently diagnosed with autism. And she goes back to sort of the start of her life and thinks about how different incidents in her life played out, and how autism was affecting her at the time without her knowing about it.
Yeah, that she was always an autistic person, yes, and being autistic was key to all her experience. And she wondered about it at times in her life, but it was only like as an adult woman in her 30s that she got that diagnosis or that assessment, to kind of crystallize what it was that had always been going on for her.
Yeah, and it's one of the interesting points of the book, I think, is that journey to diagnosis and how needlessly difficult it was for her. I mean, there were points like years in the past where she's read about autism or Aspergers at the time, and said to doctors and psychiatrists and stuff, do you think this is what I have? And they just,
might I be autistic? Yes,
out of hand. Like the one that she quotes twice, I think, is the one that says, oh no, because you're making eye contact and you've got a boyfriend, and just didn't consider anything else, any other part of evidence. And that's, I think, kind of one of the reasons that she's come to write this book, is the experience of young women and girls with autism is completely
autistic rather than with autism.
Okay, yeah. Yes, autistic girls and young women is completely different from the original sort of diagnostic criteria for autism, which, as you point out, was based on like 8-year-old boys in Vienna or something.
Yes, or various, but yes. So the history of how people defined what autism looked like, what it meant to be autistic, was based around, yes, either children with learning disabilities who were also autistic, or yes, the work of Hans Asperger in mid 20th century Germany or Austria. Yeah, so there is a persistent problem which remains true to this, to this day, of underdiagnosis for girls and women. Yeah. So what an interesting decision of hers to write this memoir in this way, because it's, I think you can't avoid in talking about this book using words like brave and honest,
bold, very bold, I would say.
Yeah.
Because at the start she talks about the fact that at one time she thought she would never go public about her diagnosis, and also the fact that she thought, okay, I might mention it, but I don't want to talk about it all the time. And obviously at a certain point she made a very conscious decision to say, actually, I am going to write about this because it needs to be written about. And because
it's me, I think that's the thing, and that's why autistic people generally talk about that way around. Their autism is not a sort of add-on thing that they carry around with them like a handbag. It is who you are. It's intrinsic to you, you know. So
Yeah.
and so yes, she obviously hit a point when she realized, no, this is who I am, and I do want to talk about it. And also, yes, maybe it's some kind of, she talks about the benefit that she had from sort of following other autistic women on social media and so on, and
autistic communities online and so on.
Yeah.
And also the fact that like she got a lot of support from those groups, but that shouldn't be the only source of support. And the only source of sort of information.
Yeah. But she's also a comedian, very successful one. And I suppose the risk for her in writing this book and writing it so honestly is, you know, there's that, you know, will people not want to work with me? Will they think I'm going to be difficult to work with? You know, and one of the really striking things that she does in this book is write about her autistic meltdowns. And, you know, you know, it's like, oh, you know, people talk about neurodivergence now and, oh, you know, everyone's a bit on the spectrum and, oh, isn't it wonderful we live in a neurodiverse world and all of that, you know, and people don't tend to write about what it's like to have that kind of extreme sensory or reaction to sensory challenges that means you literally melt down. You know, she talks about smashing doors and in her house pulling you know, her kitchen units to pieces, you know, because and that's not something that people find sort of glamorous and socially acceptable, you know.
And she talks about that, and she talks about how the kind of the other response you can get if you're going into sensory overload, you can have a meltdown or you can have a shutdown, and a shutdown is kind of seen as being a bit more socially acceptable to sort of talk about, even though they're both very natural responses to the same kind of overstimulation. And that's why she said, you know, I thought about leaving this out of the book, but if everyone keeps leaving it out of everything, you know, it's never going to become more recognized.
So, but it's very much it's very much a memoir. It does kind of work through different sort of stages of her life. It is quite bleak at times, isn't it? I mean, so sad.
Yeah, absolutely.
So sad.
I mean, reading the front cover and the first couple of pages where you get quotes from people, I mean, reading the quote off the cover, an absolute riot, or funny, sharp. Like I was expecting, it sounds silly now that I've read it, but I was expecting a book that was going to be absolutely hilarious. Partially because obviously I've seen her as a comedian, and I know that she is really funny. Actually, the majority of the first part of the book I found quite distressing to read because of just how difficult it was. I don't know what you kind of felt.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, and for me, you know, the trajectory she had, you know, like, you know, age 16, she's in a, you know, a CAMS, you know, like a children's mental health unit, and so, you know, and I know so many young women that have had that experience, and you know, and some that have come through like her, and others where, you know, they've been even more damaged or
sort of institutionalized or
you know, or you know, and so I really I felt you know, I've felt that really deeply, as it were. And she does bring humor all the way through. You know, some of the things she describes, you know, when she's writing about the staff and the other people in that mental health unit, you know, like it's kind of, there is a kind of black humor to it as well. She's very acute.
Absolutely, yeah.
Her observations of people and how they interact and how they behave are so smart, aren't they?
Yeah, they're fantastic. Yeah. And likewise, there's points in her life where she very nearly sort of ends up in the criminal justice system and could have never made it out of that system. So she kind of found a narrow path that worked. And between all of that, you get these moments where she is talking humorously about quite experiences. And I did wonder whether the audiobook, because she narrates the audiobook, whether the audiobook would have been more amusing because a lot of her delivery, like a lot of it's like tone of voice and the way that things are kind of said. But yeah, you can't get away from the fact that she goes through some pretty tough times.
Tough times. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I was thinking as I was reading the book is, oh my goodness, what will it be like for her family to read this book? I don't know, was that in your head as well?
Yes, definitely. Particularly some of the things that she writes about her mother, and the difficult relationship that they had kind of throughout her life. But then she addresses that at the end of the book, and she kind of goes back and writes about talking to her mother after knowing that she was autistic. And I found that really moving, and the kind of the realization that she had of how hard her parents were trying, without having any support or any kind of roadmap for what to do. And even today, if somebody does know that they're autistic, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a good support and care plan in place for their parents to know how to manage that in the best way.
Yeah, how to help that person, manage a world that isn't always conducive to flourishing if you're neurodivergent. Yes, absolutely. And she did come to recognize some of the things that her parents had done right, as it were. And so yes, I was really glad that, because you feel like, I was glad to get to that chapter in a sense. I mean, I suppose perhaps as a parent, and you had some inkling of that experience, as it were, and someone who works a lot with parents, I was glad that she's got to that place with her mother and doesn't. So it's a well-structured memoir, I think, because she sort of, the way she does that thing, she starts in one place, then she goes right back and kind of takes you through her and then she brings it up to now and how she's living now and what she's doing, and then she says, but there isn't the end of the story. This is not like,
and I'm still learning how to manage. For me, I think the turning point, strangely, the point where it became less distressing and in some ways bleak, was when she started working in the strip club. And I think you enjoyed that chapter as well, because for the first time it was like, she made a very sensible and conscious decision to do work that was working for her, and that, and she says it in a way like it was a good place to work as somebody with like a neurodivergent person, and she seemed to be then sort of able to start making decisions to move in a direction that made life work better for her, and then was able to build the confidence to then go into sort of the stand-up comedy route, which was something that she'd been interested in for a while. So I was interested that chapter made me start to feel like she was able to sort of take a bit more control of her path, as to sort of teenage years where, like you said, she was kind of going through CAMS and
whilst always managing to do well academically, notwithstanding, which was one of life's strengths for her, as it were. And I think it's really interesting, and we should wind up fairly soon because we promised we wouldn't let this get too long. But I think it's really interesting how many neurodivergent comedians there are. I mean, I personally know a woman who's a autistic stand-up comedian, who started doing it in the time that I've known her, as it were, and is sort of, her kind of career is just sort of taking off, but also people with ADHD, like Angela Barnes say, she, it's actually, it interestingly seems to be a career choice that can
that appeals.
yeah, and where your neurodivergence can be can come in useful.
Yeah, I think she says in one of her shows, like, I don't need alcohol to be like blunt and overly direct, and being blunt and overly direct as a comedian
It's good.
can be a fantastic way to get people laughing.
Yeah, yeah. So would you recommend it as a book to other readers?
Yes, absolutely. I would say be prepared for, like, don't go into it expecting to laugh on every page. I would say go into it, you know, ready to kind of get to grips with her experience.
Yeah, yeah.
But I would absolutely recommend it.
Yeah, and notwithstanding its sort of bleakness, overall, it's extremely rich. She's good with words, you know, it's
Yeah.
extremely readable. It's
Yeah, she writes so well. Yeah.
really well, really well. I hope she writes more books. She is. I mean, she did start out kind of in journalism for a little bit. You know, she's a writer. She's a writer as well as a comedian, and you know, she should do more. Yeah. Yeah. So a big success for our first read in People April. And thank you for coming and talking about it.
No, thank you. And yeah, and let us know if you've decided to read this for People April, or if you read it previously, or just any sort of responses that you have. Feel free to leave them in the comments.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I've got to remember how I stop recording. And I'm just going to have a little panic about that.
You have to, in the middle of the screen, there's a button there's a stop recording button.
There it is. Thank you.
Okay, thanks guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.